Rob, can you go ahead and start recording?
Recording is live.
Okay, thank you. So welcome to the Preschool Initiative Consortium webinar on early childhood developmental milestones. We're so glad you're able to listen to the recording or be on with us present. Oops. My name is Maggie Mendoza, and I am a Migrant Academic Services Coordinator around literacy and early learning at Educational Service District 105 in Yakima, Washington. For attendance purposes and to see who is in the audience, please type in a chat box your first and last name, your role or title, and the state you work in. After the webinar, the PowerPoint presentation and any related documents will be sent to the email address you used to register.
Great, and I see lots of folks typing in the chat box. We've got North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, lots of Floridas. So keep those coming.
And I have two colleagues on the webinar also who will be assisting me with the chat box and other logistics. Would you two like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Michelle Cheney, and I'm the coordinator for the Preschool Initiative.
My name is Lisandra Alexander, and I am from the Pennsylvania Migrant Program, the lead state for the grant.
Thank you. The Preschool Initiative, the PI, is a consortium incentive grant. Consortium incentive grants are authorized under Section 1308D of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and reauthorized under No Child Left Behind and more recently the Every Student Succeeds Act. The purpose of the SIGs is to promote interstate coordination among migrant education programs nationwide. Competitive incentive grants are awarded to state education agencies to improve the delivery of services to migratory children and youth whose education has been interrupted. Pennsylvania is the consortium's lead state, and member states in blue include Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Maine, Missouri, Oregon, and Washington State. The consortium also has non-funded partner states who have access to all member resources. Those are Alaska, Hawaii, Indiana, Montana, and North Carolina. The PI-SIG goals are to expand the capacity of state and local MEPs to serve migrant preschool children, ensure that more services are provided to migrant 3 to 5-year-old children, and to disseminate information on evidence-based and promising practices. Please take a few moments after the webinar to visit the PI Clearinghouse at www.preschoolinitiative.org. The site contains information on helpful resources for parents and service providers. I encourage you to take a look at the learning kits developed by PI. Great books and activities for kids as they focus on literacy and numeracy skills. We are also planning a Learning Kits webinar on May 19th. My colleagues can share more information in the chat box. Also, it is extremely helpful to us if you would take a minute while on the site to complete the short survey about the Clearinghouse. Click on the Share Your Feedback box on the home page. It is circled in red on the slide. Your feedback is essential to determining how the Clearinghouse grows and develops. Our objective for this module is to increase our understanding of the developmental milestones that occur between the ages of 3 and 5, and how culture can impact those milestones. As service providers and advocates, This information can help us plan activities that are appropriate and doable for children at different ages and different stages of development. In thinking about the objectives that were just mentioned, write down one question you would like answered by the end of our time together as it relates to early childhood developmental milestones and supporting migrant preschoolers. There is no need to type your question in the chat room right now. We have planned Q&A time throughout the presentation.
I don't see anything in the Q&A yet.
Okay. Developmental milestones are a way for all adults to use to positively impact a child's development. They're intended to build bridges between families, early child care professionals, school-age educators, and all those who work with children. They create a way for families and the people that care for and educate their children to share a common language and come together as equals. Families bring deep knowledge, experience, and observations about their children. And professionals, whether caregivers, childcare professionals, teachers, or healthcare providers, bring knowledge and strategies for positive child development. Those who care for children bring different perspectives about what the child's developing school skills look like in different environments. The more perspectives we have on a child's development, the better we can help that child reach their potential. Developmental milestones offer a common frame of reference about how to help our preschoolers succeed. It is important to understand that these developmental milestones are not a guide to child development or a developmental checklist. Children's development is highly individualized and unique to each child. It is also important to note that this is not an assessment tool or for use to determine children's eligibility for various programs or services. This is neither a curriculum nor a program model. These milestones have been created by the consortium team for the purpose of this training, of training new staff working with migrant families and or parents, and provide developmental characteristics of typically developing preschoolers. In this session, we will be discussing general growth and development milestones and age ranges typically associated with those milestones. It is important to remember that we should not jump to conclusions and assume that a child is delayed if they fall outside of these age range milestones. If you have a concern about a child and his or her development, be sure to follow up with a physician. The developmental domains we will be discussing are social and emotional development, which refers to a combination of the social aspects of learning and interacting with others, as well as a child's ability to deal with his or her own emotions and understand the emotions of others. Activities that encourage children to play with others, share, take turns, and emphasize with others who may be feeling sad or angry all help to develop a child's social emotional skills. Language communication skills tend to increase dramatically between the ages of 3 and 5. Exposing a child to multiple opportunities per day for them to engage in conversations and learn new vocabulary help to increase a child's development in language and communication skills. Cognitive skill development includes memory and thinking, the ability to attend or pay attention to an activity for increasing periods of time, and the ability to understand cause and effect relationships. Helping a child participate in activities that build their cognitive skills can also help build executive function skills, which allow a child to plan, focus, and eventually juggle multiple tasks as they grow older. Physical development includes both fine and gross motor skills. As with the other skill development areas, it is important to provide multiple opportunities for children to participate in activities that increase both their fine and gross motor abilities. Take a look at this chart and read about the social-emotional benchmarks and characteristics across ages. Jot down something new or an aha you had while looking this over.
As you take just a minute to look at the chart, feel free to type some thoughts, your ahas, or anything that comes to mind in the chat room. And any other questions also. We've got very little participation in the chat room right now, so let's go ahead and start using that a little bit.
How about one more minute?
Michelle, there is something in the chat.
Yep, fantastic. We've got some folks typing in either sort of ahas or things that they didn't know before, so please keep that going.
We have a question, Maggie. So gender isn't expected until age 5. I cannot hear you, Maggie. Are you on mute?
Yep. Oh, I see. Gender. So at age 5 is aware of gender. I think that may depend on the child as well. I know there are some younger toddlers that are aware of their own gender. Maybe it's more of identifying between the gender of themselves and others. Okay, we'll move on to the next developmental domain. Language and communication. Spend a minute or two looking over the language and communication chart. Also, jot down some major differences you notice between 3 and 5-year-olds in the chat box. How would this affect planning activities?
Yeah, I'm still seeing the social emotional slide.
Okay.
I'm in language and communication.
Yep.
Oh, so it's my screen that froze.
Are we okay?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. So take a minute to look over the language and communication chart and use the chat box to jot down some differences you notice between 3 and 5-year-olds and how this affects planning activities. Also consider your English language learners. How is the chat box looking?
We're getting some responses. Lizzie said, I didn't know the basic rules of grammar emerged by age 4. Good to know for lesson planning. Iris says planning for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds is different because that's when they can communicate with you. 3-year-olds follow instruction 2 to 3 steps. Sarah was surprised about the skills the children would have. Constance says instruction with older students to include 2 or more directional tasks. And then Violeta says, interesting kids should know their address by age 5. In the age technology, I thought high schoolers and some of them didn't even know their address. And Ophelia says, one of the difference is speaking future tense. And I don't see anything in the Q&A.
Perfect. Let's move on to cognitive development. Again, take some time to read the following chart around cognitive development and type in the chat box some questions you think families would have around this domain.
I have a question from Heriberto. Is in a bilingual family, does the child develop a first language or are both languages being developed at the same time? Should parents encourage the development of a first language? I cannot hear you, Maggie, I'm sorry.
That's a great question. Michelle, would you like to help answer that?
I think Michelle was having technical issues, so she was logging off and logging on again.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I would say it is language can be developed 3 ways. It can be from one language to the other. It can be both at the same time, or sequential, which means you learn one first and then the other. And it can also be concurrent, where you learn both at the same time. It is encouraged for the parents to speak to the students in the first language, because that helps develop language too as well. Do you guys have anything to add?
No, I would say that just to include that a lot of bilingual homes, they go back and forth with language. So like you mentioned, they learn it at the same time or maybe one more than the other. So it's important to consider which language is the primary. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Parents of EL may wonder if their children are cognitive development at the rate of similar age peers, if they know colors, numbers, body parts in one language but not another. We come across Florida students that know some. And Sarah has seen that they need a foundation. And somebody said they're a little lost, Ophelia. She's saying stages 3 is doing 4, is naming 5 the math. So I'm not sure what she's asking about. I guess it's a continuum, right? So once you get them in age 3, then age 4 would increase in some of those on age 5. So if you can just clarify that.
Right, and then so at age 4, for example, name some colors and some numbers. Usually at this age, and maybe even some 3-year-olds are able to name colors and numbers, like maybe how old they are, but don't really understand the number concept yet. So at age 5, children are able to count to 10 or more things and have been developing the one-to-one correspondence skills, and also are able to identify a number to the number items, if that makes sense. At age 4, they're more of, for some, exploring numbers as just saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but not really having the one-to-one correspondence to know that 5 means 5 objects and are able to count up to 5, if that makes sense.
Does that make sense, Ophelia?
Okay, so take a moment to read the last chart about movement and physical development. What are some barriers or challenges you can think of during this time, this age range? Or even this time of isolation and being home? What are some challenges or barriers for promoting movement and physical development with children 3 to 5, or even adults?
Jonathan says living conditions may limit opportunities for children. Marielle says lack of physical activity. Iris says they don't like bike or equipment. Miriam says space may be an issue if confined to the home. Lizzie says some students find encouragement in movement and physical development when in social gatherings, like in playgrounds or recess. And Gloria says kids are getting less outdoor time.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, more stuff is coming in. Poverty limits, overcrowded homes. Like Sarah said, there's more gross motor skills practice than the fine motor.
Very good observations.
Yeah.
Good. So we've covered a lot already in the last 20 minutes or so, but let's take a minute here for any questions on what we've discussed so far.
Nothing yet, Maggie.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. We'll have other pauses throughout the rest of the presentation for questions too.
Oh, something just came in.
Okay.
Would this list be helpful to parents?
Absolutely. I think it's helpful for parents, for caregivers, for advocates to be aware of the developmental milestones in the continuum of development for their child, but also it is important to recognize that all children develop at different ages and stages. I always like to give the example because culture plays a big part of development. And I always like to give the example with my own children. Our firstborn didn't start walking until she was 13 months old. And part of that was because she was the firstborn, only grandchild in our family and didn't really have to use her gross motor skills for moving from one place to next because she was carried all the time. And so that's important to recognize as well. And our secondborn, they're only 18 months apart, started walking at 9 months. And so he had someone to, follow around. He had someone modeling physical development and other skills. So he was catching on really quickly. So I do always like to, remind educators and parents that children, this is a continuum and of typically developing children. These are characteristics of that, but it's important to remember that culture and environment play a big role in that as well.
And there's really nice charts in the CDC website in several languages, I believe.
Yes, and I do have that reference link at the end of the presentation as well for folks.
One more
So it
question.
is,
Oh,
yep.
okay. They're saying if it's going to be translated into Spanish, but they are in the CDC website that we'll share at the end.
Yes. So it is also important that we reference the Disabilities Education Act. The next 3 slides, we will review instances in which you may want to consult with a doctor or suggest to a family that they have their child seen by a doctor. It is also important to find out if your state has added details to this definition of developmental delay. Here are some characteristics that may be of concern for a 3-year-old child. It is important that you are observing a child on a regular basis and on multiple occasions, or encouraging families to before calling the doctor or suggesting to families to take their child to the doctor. We also know that children all develop at different ages, and the benchmarks are a way to provide us some general guidance. Here are some concerns for a 4-year-old. And finally, here are some concerns for a 5-year-old. And I'll leave that up for a minute.
There is a question about the PowerPoint. Yes, everything and the recording and everything will be shared with you at the end of the webinar.
As I mentioned, culture and environment influences child development. A child's background and background experiences will have an effect on that child's development. It is always important to take this into consideration when thinking about how a child is developing. For example, young children with older siblings can sometimes appear to have delayed language or communication skills. However, a conversation with the family about how the young child gets his or her needs met may reveal that the older siblings are often quick to speak for the youngest or help meet the child's needs without the child having to actually verbally ask for something. Learning about the children and families you work with will help you better support their needs. Getting a better understanding of a student's funds of knowledge can enhance classroom practices for teachers, children, and families. Using this approach to understanding students' overall sets of abilities and experiences can help educators draw on these skills in classrooms to enrich their understanding of content while also motivating them during classroom activities and in engaging families. This Funds of Knowledge worksheet is a great way to learn more about your family as well as the families you work with. The worksheet focuses on 10 areas. home language, family values and traditions, caregiving or parenting, friends and family outings, household chores, educational activities, favorite TV shows, family occupations, and scientific knowledge. After the webinar, you may want to complete the Funds of Knowledge handout for you and your family and think about how a friend or colleague may complete their form. What's different? What's similar? Let's take a minute here for any questions or comments on what we've discussed so far.
I don't see anything coming in, Maggie.
Okay. It is again important to remember that all children develop differently. Culture and family background can influence a child's development. Take time to get to know the families you work with. Also remember that it is our role to respect and honor cultural differences with our families. In a moment, you will be reading a developmental vignette and responding to a couple of prompts. Before I share the vignette with you all, keep in mind the following questions as it relates to developmental milestones. What are some strategies to support Lisa's development? Support for Lisa's family, and finally some strategies to support the educators in Lisa's life. Take a moment to read about 3-year-old Lisa. If it's helpful, I can read this too if it may be kind of small for folks. Or would you like to help read, Lisandra?
I can see it okay.
Okay, perfect. We'll give folks about 5 minutes to read and kind of reflect on those questions, and then we'll debrief. Okay. We'll give everybody about 2 more minutes and we'll come back and debrief.
And as folks finish the reading, go ahead and type some thoughts into the chat room. I put the prompts in there that were on the previous slide.
Perfect, thank you.
We have one person already talking about how interesting it is to see the situation and scenario from different perspectives.
And after responding to those prompts, go ahead and enter in the chat box. You can enter one key takeaway from the vignette activity or a strategy to support Lisa, her family, or the educators in her life.
I have a question. Are there resources on different cultural values affect child development? Thinking of examples of differences in the way of different cultures, emphasizing different values like cooperation, creativity, helpfulness, obedience. I'm curious what would affect with certain skill developments. Do you know of any resources, Maggie?
Not that I can think of right now, but we can definitely see if we can find some and send those out with the resources.
Right.
Can you think of any, Michelle?
Sorry, I was muted there. I'll have to dig up some resources. I know I have some. And just thinking about cultural differences and developmental milestones, it was interesting for me to learn that different cultures think and organize their thoughts and then their actions in different ways. So when I was an ESL teacher, a lot of the children who came from Mexico, when we would learn to write papers, they would go round and round and round with the idea. So it was really hard to get them to write sort of a linear, here's an idea, here's supporting details, and here's a concluding statement, for example. And upon closer study, I found out that many other cultures think more spherically, and that it's pretty uniquely American to think very linearly. And so as we learn those things and how that actually impacts how we attack activities in school or homework assignments or whatnot, that was interesting. So I'll see what I can dig up to send out to folks after the webinar.
Perfect, thank you.
And Lysandra, we have another participant, Sarah, who noted that the teacher's response may not have been the most appropriate. And so I think getting that teacher some information about how migrant can help and connecting the family with some healthcare and whatnot would be a really great place to go.
That's a great observation. And so what are some key components of successful programs for supporting migrant students like Lisa? They're programs that establish relationships to learn about the home life and family goals, and they address the social and cultural processes as well as the academic challenges that migrant students and families face. Instructional leaders and teachers use the funds of knowledge to make their classrooms more inclusive while creating a community of learners that values diversity and builds pride in the home culture of all. The homeschool connection is strengthened by empowering families and building upon their strengths. The whole family is engaged as partners, learners, instructional coaches, advisors, advocates, and teachers of their children. So let's think back at the beginning of the webinar and revisit the question you wrote down or thought you had. Did anyone have a question that didn't get answered? Are there any other reflections or comments?
We have a couple of comments coming in, and I'm just reviewing some of the previous comments in the chat room when folks were looking at the vignette. And so a lot of good information there about making sure that the whole picture is presented and that we have more details and don't jump to conclusions about how the migrant program can step in and help and make sure that families understand schools and the teachers understand the families and what each is going through, and really work together to sort of build a more comprehensive approach to getting Lisa whatever care she might need, and making sure that everybody understands before jumping to conclusions. So I appreciate that very comprehensive approach to looking at Lisa's potential problems or addressing her needs at the moment.
Those are good comments and observations.
And people continue to write about the importance of things like keeping in mind the social, economic, and cultural context around the children. Absolutely.
Somebody said they were horrified by the teacher's response. And somebody says that they think the recruiter could help find free or low-cost medical treatments and help the parents understand that a long-term injury could hurt Lisa, and the liaison would meet to get the trust.
Absolutely.
All fantastic ideas.
Yes.
Maggie, the one thing that I wanted to add, what was, when we were working as a consortium to first put this together, and we delivered it, you delivered it in several different occasions, face-to-face to an audience of teachers and migrant staff and other practitioners and educators. What struck me as so important was thinking about the developmental milestones in context of the activities that we're asking the little kids to do. I do a lot of work with preschool students, and I often hear either the parents or the support staff or the paraprofessional, whoever, say that the little kids just won't sit still. They just won't sit still. They just won't sit still for my activity or for my lesson. And so for me, a big takeaway is remembering that one of the important factors in understanding what developmental milestones are at each of the different ages is so that we can appropriately and adequately plan the activities. Because 3-year-olds really don't sit still for very long, and that's normal. And we want to make sure that we know that when thinking about what we're asking them to do. And so for me, that was really an eye-opener, knowing what kids can do at different ages so that I can plan something that best meets their developmental milestones and their needs. And we're not asking them to do something that we shouldn't expect them to do at that age.
That's very important to include. Thank you.
Oh, I love that we just got a comment about parents supporting home language. So I'll step back on the soapbox for just 1 minute now that I've got my internet and
Sure.
my internet back. So yeah, we know all the research points to continue to use native language, not just use it, but build it. The more kids know in their native language, the easier transition to any other language is. It's an asset, not a deficit. And if anybody's interested in background or research on that, there's plenty out there I can send you. And the Preschool Initiative does strongly support use of native language in all occasions. In fact, when you look at the website and you see things like our learning kits, you'll notice that we encourage parents to read children in their native language, and if they're not literate in any language or their native language, to go ahead and tell the story based on the pictures in any language that they're most comfortable with. So that's very important. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, thank you. So we wanted to provide some resource information about developmental milestones. Like Lisandra mentioned, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have translated resources in multiple languages for that are parent-friendly. And also the link to the PI Clearinghouse, the Preschool Initiative website that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So take a moment to jot those down or to click on the live links or to take a picture. And a survey link. Thank you again for participating in the Developmental Milestones webinar. Please complete the webinar survey by clicking on the link on the screen or by hovering your cell phone camera function over the QR code. Your feedback and participation is valuable, and we would love to see you on another webinar.
The
Thank you to
QR link
everyone.
is closing.
What was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said the QR code is working.
Perfect.
We have people saying thank you. Should we stop the recording?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and we'll be on for a couple more minutes if anybody has any questions that were not answered during the presentation.